What you're about to hear cost one family everything: their inheritance, their reputation, and their pride. And it started with a quiet man pulling out a chair at a dinner table where nobody wanted him to sit. Nobody wanted to help the old woman on Birch Hill Road. 4 nurses had quit. 2 caregivers walked out before the end of their first week. But when Eugene Wells showed up at her front door with a toolbox and a brown paper bag of groceries, he did something nobody expected. He stayed. And 12 years later, that decision brought an entire family to its knees. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? New York, London, maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. Now let me tell you about Eugene. And listen closely, because this man deserved so much better than what he got from the people in this story. Eugene Henry Wells was 55 years old. He was a short man, 5'5", stocky in the chest and shoulders, the way men get when they spend their lives lifting heavy things. Furniture, lumber, engine parts, other people's burdens. He had dark brown skin with a reddish undertone that made him look like he was always standing in warm light, and his hands were wide and square, the kind of hands that look like they were built to hold the world steady. He had a thin mustache that he trimmed every Sunday morning with a pair of scissors in front of the bathroom mirror, and he wore the same rotation of clothes every week: khaki work pants, a plain t-shirt, and a flannel shirt over it, buttoned once at the chest. Never all the way, just once. That was his style, if you could call it that. He had a slow, careful way of moving, like a man who had learned a long time ago that rushing only breaks things. Eugene lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on Clement Street in Asheville, North Carolina. The apartment was small and clean and quiet. The floors were old hardwood that creaked when he walked to the kitchen at night. The walls were bare except for 2 things: a framed photograph of his mother, Dolores, who had passed when he was 30, and a wooden cross he had carved himself from a piece of oak that fell in a storm. The apartment smelled like black coffee and wood oil, because Eugene drank coffee all day and spent his evenings refinishing old furniture that people left on the curb. He would carry broken chairs and wobbly tables up the narrow stairs to his apartment, sand them down, fix the joints, stain them, and then bring them to the Salvation Army on Saturday mornings. He never kept any of them. He just liked fixing things. Fixing things made him feel useful. And feeling useful was the closest thing Eugene had to feeling loved. He had never been married. He came close once, in his 30s. A woman named Darlene, who worked at the post office, and had a laugh that could fill a room. They dated for 2 years. But Darlene wanted children and a house and a life that Eugene couldn't afford on a handyman's salary. She told him one evening, sitting on the steps of her apartment, "Eugene, you're the kindest man I've ever met. But kind doesn't pay the mortgage." She wasn't being cruel, she was being honest, and Eugene understood. He watched her marry another man the following year, a plumber named Gerald who bought her a little yellow house. Eugene drove past that house sometimes. He didn't feel bitter, he just felt quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into a person when they've accepted that their life is going to be smaller than they hoped, but they're going to live it well anyway. Eugene had been working as a handyman and home caretaker for over 20 years. He mowed lawns, fixed leaky pipes, replaced broken steps, painted fences. He was the kind of man people called when something was broken and they didn't know who else to call. He charged fair prices. Sometimes he charged nothing at all, especially for the elderly folks in his neighborhood who were living on Social Security and had nobody else. He once spent an entire Saturday replacing the rotten porch boards on an 80-year-old woman's house and refused to take a dime. She made him a plate of fried chicken and sweet tea, and he sat on her new porch and ate it like it was a feast at a palace. To Eugene, it was. Now, 12 years before this story begins, Eugene got a call from a home care agency. They needed someone to help maintain the property of an elderly woman who lived alone on Birch Hill Road, on the wealthy side of Asheville. The woman's name was Constance Webb. She was 71 years old at the time, recently widowed, and her house, a large white colonial with green shutters and a wraparound porch, was falling apart because her late husband, Arthur, had been the one who handled everything, And now Arthur was gone, and the gutters were clogged, and the back steps were rotting, and the garden was dying. The agency warned Eugene. Mrs. Webb was difficult. She was sharp-tongued. She was demanding. She had opinions about everything and patience for nothing. 4 nurses had quit in 6 months. 2 caregivers had walked out before their first week was over. One of them told the agency, "That woman could make a saint lose their temper." Eugene showed up at the front door of the Birch Hill house on a Tuesday morning in March. He had his toolbox in one hand and a brown paper bag of groceries in the other, bread, eggs, milk, and a jar of honey, because the agency had mentioned she liked tea with honey. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, the door opened, and there stood Constance Webb. She was a thin woman, small-boned and straight-backed, with silver hair pinned up in a neat bun and pale blue eyes that looked at you like they were deciding whether you were worth her time. She wore a navy cardigan and a string of pearls, real pearls, the kind that cost more than Eugene made in a month. She looked at Eugene from his work boots to his flannel shirt. She looked at his toolbox. She looked at the grocery bag. "Who are you?" she said. Not rude exactly, just direct. Like a woman who had been disappointed too many times to bother with pleasantries. "I'm Eugene, ma'am. The agency sent me. I'm here to help with the house." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, "The last man they sent couldn't even find the water shutoff valve. Can you find a water shutoff valve?" "Yes, ma'am." "Prove it." Eugene smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one, like a lamp turning on in a quiet room. He set down the groceries, picked up his toolbox, walked around the side of the house, and found the shutoff valve in 45 seconds. He came back to the front door. "Blue handle," he said. "By the foundation, left side behind the azalea bush." Constance Webb looked at him. Something shifted in her face, not softness exactly, but a crack in the wall, a tiny opening. "Come in," she said, "and bring those groceries. I'm out of honey." What I'm about to tell you is going to make you angry. And it should. That first day, Eugene spent 6 hours at the house. He fixed the back steps, 3 boards rotten through, the nails rusted orange and loose in the wood. He unclogged the kitchen gutter, pulling out a ball of wet leaves and mud the size of a cantaloupe. He replaced a flickering light bulb in the upstairs hallway that Constance said had been driving her crazy for 2 months. He tightened the loose handle on the back door. He oiled the squeaky hinge on the garden gate that made a sound like a cat being stepped on every time it opened. And while he worked, Constance watched him from the kitchen window. She sat at the table with her tea, black tea with honey, in a white porcelain cup with a gold rim that Arthur had bought on their anniversary trip to Charleston. And she watched this quiet man move through her house like he already knew where everything belonged. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He didn't talk just to fill the silence. He worked the way good craftsmen work, deliberately, carefully, with respect for the material and the task. When he finished the steps, he swept the sawdust off the porch. When he fixed the light, he cleaned the fixture. He left things better than he found them, which is a rare quality in any person. At the end of that first day, Constance came to the front door as Eugene was loading his toolbox into his truck. "Same time tomorrow?" she said. It wasn't a question. It was almost a plea. And Eugene could see it. Behind the sharpness, behind the pearls and the perfect posture and the "prove it," he could see a woman who was terrified of being alone, who had spent 6 months watching people walk out her door and not come back, who was testing him not because she was difficult, but because she needed to know if he would stay. "Same time tomorrow," he said. And he came back. The next day, and the next, and the next. For 12 years. Over time, the house on Birch Hill became something other than a job. It became a place where Eugene felt necessary. He learned the rhythms of the house, which floorboards creaked in the morning cold, which windows stuck when it rained, where the afternoon light pooled on the living room floor in a warm golden rectangle that Constance's old tabby cat Biscuit liked to sleep in. Biscuit was 16 years old, had one ear that flopped sideways and purred like a small motor. Eugene built Biscuit a little wooden ramp so the cat could get onto Constance's bed without jumping, because his old knees couldn't take the jump anymore. Constance didn't thank Eugene for the ramp. She just looked at it and then looked at him and said, "It's crooked." It wasn't crooked, but that was how Constance said thank you. He learned Constance's rhythms too, that she was sharpest in the morning and softest in the evening, that she read poetry before bed, that she talked to Arthur's photograph when she thought nobody was listening, saying things like, "Arthur, the hydrangeas need cutting back. You always cut them too late." Eugene pretended not to hear. He understood that some conversations are private even when they're spoken out loud. Eugene didn't just maintain the house. Over those 12 years, he became Constance Webb's lifeline. He fixed the gutters, replaced the shutters, painted the porch, repaired the furnace twice, tended the garden that Arthur had planted 30 years ago. Roses along the fence, hydrangeas by the front steps, tomatoes in the back that Constance insisted on growing even though her arthritis made it impossible for her to kneel in the dirt anymore. So Eugene knelt for her. He came 5 days a week, sometimes 6. He cooked meals when she couldn't grip a pan. Simple meals at first, scrambled eggs and toast, soup from a can. But over time he learned what she liked, and he started cooking real food. Roast chicken on Sundays, collard greens with vinegar the way her mother used to make them, cornbread in a cast-iron skillet. He drove her to doctor's appointments, sitting in the waiting room for hours reading old magazines while she saw the specialist. He carried her groceries up the porch steps, one bag at a time. He sat with her on the porch in the evenings while she drank tea with honey and told him stories about Arthur, about her childhood in Virginia where she grew up on a horse farm, about the daughter she lost to a car accident in 1988, a wound so deep that even after all these years she couldn't say the girl's name without pressing her hand to her chest and looking away. Eugene listened. That was his gift. He listened the way the earth listens to rain. Completely, without judgment, absorbing everything. He never rushed her stories. He never checked his phone. He never said, "You already told me that one." He just sat in the wicker chair beside her, his wide hands resting on his knees, and listened. Over the years, something happened between them that neither of them named. It was not romance. It was something deeper and rarer than that. It was the bond that forms when two lonely people find each other and stop being lonely. Eugene had no family. Constance had no one who cared. And so they became family to each other. Not by blood, not by law, but by showing up. Day after day after day. But Constance had real family. And that family was about to become a very big problem. Constance had one surviving relative, her nephew, Raymond Webb. Raymond was 48 years old, tall and sharp-featured, with slicked-back hair and teeth that were too white and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore expensive suits and drove a black Mercedes and lived in a gated neighborhood in Charlotte. He sold commercial real estate and made good money, but he spent it faster than he made it. Boats, trips, watches, a country club membership he couldn't really afford. Raymond was the kind of man who measured his worth by what other people could see, and what other people could see was slowly going bankrupt underneath all that polish. Raymond visited Constance maybe twice a year, Thanksgiving and her birthday, if he remembered. He'd show up with a box of chocolates or a bouquet of grocery store flowers, stay for an hour, ask how she was feeling, without listening to the answer, and then leave. He never fixed anything. He never cooked anything. He never sat on the porch and listened to stories about Arthur or the garden or the daughter whose name Constance couldn't say. But Raymond knew one thing very clearly. Constance Webb was worth $4 million. The house on Birch Hill was worth $1.2 million alone. There were investments, savings accounts, Arthur's life insurance. And Raymond was the only living relative. He had been counting on that money for years. He had, in fact, already borrowed against it in his own mind, had already spent it, already planned the new house and the new car and the debt payoff. In Raymond's mind, Constance's money was already his. He was just waiting for the formality. And then Raymond came to Thanksgiving dinner, and he saw Eugene. Now here is where everything starts to fall apart. It was a Tuesday evening in November. Constance had insisted on a proper Thanksgiving dinner, even though her health had been declining. She was 83 now. Her arthritis had spread to her hips. She used a walker. Her memory was still sharp. Lord, was it sharp. But her body was failing. Eugene had spent 2 days preparing the house. He cleaned every room. He polished the dining table. He set out the good china, the set with the blue flowers that Arthur had bought on their anniversary trip to Charleston. He cooked the entire meal himself: turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread, sweet potato pie. He even put a small vase of flowers from the garden on the table, the last roses of the season, their petals just starting to curl at the edges. Constance had invited Raymond. She had also, quietly, asked Eugene to stay for dinner. Not as the help, as a guest. She told him to sit at the table with them.
"Mrs. Webb, I don't think your nephew would—" "I didn't ask what Raymond would think," Constance said. Her blue eyes were fierce, even behind their tiredness. "I asked you to sit at my table. Will you?" Eugene nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Raymond arrived at 5 o'clock with his wife, Janelle, a pretty woman with a tight smile who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, and their daughter Sophie, who was 11 years old, skinny and shy, with glasses too big for her face and a book tucked under her arm. Sophie was the kind of child who spoke only when spoken to and spent most of her time reading in corners. Raymond barely paid attention to her. He treated her the way some people treat a piece of furniture they inherited. It's there. They don't dislike it. They just don't notice it. Raymond walked into the dining room, saw the beautiful table, saw the turkey, saw the china, and then saw Eugene. Eugene, in his cleanest flannel shirt, sitting at the table, a glass of water in front of him, his wide hands folded in his lap. Raymond's face tightened. He looked at Constance. "Aunt Connie, why is the handyman sitting at the dinner table?" Constance didn't blink. "His name is Eugene. He cooked this meal. He set this table. He has been taking care of me in this house for 12 years. He is sitting at this table because I invited him. Sit down, Raymond." Raymond sat, but something dark crossed his face. A flash of anger, of resentment, of something calculating behind his eyes. He unfolded his napkin with sharp, quick movements and placed it on his lap. And from that moment on, Raymond treated Eugene like he was furniture. Worse than furniture. At least you acknowledge a chair before you sit in it. He talked over Eugene. When Eugene said, "The turkey came out well, I think," Raymond continued a conversation with Janelle about a property listing, as if the words hadn't been spoken at all. He talked around Eugene. He said things like, "Aunt Connie, you should really hire a proper chef for these dinners." While Eugene, the man who had spent 2 days cooking, was sitting 3 feet away. When Eugene passed the breadbasket, Raymond took it without looking at him, without a nod, without a grunt. Not even the basic acknowledgement you'd give a stranger on the street. At one point, Raymond talked about his business, a big deal he was closing, some office complex in Charlotte, and he said, loud enough for the table, "You know, in real estate, it's all about who you know. The people at your table matter. You have to surround yourself with people of value." He didn't look at Eugene when he said it. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Janelle shifted in her seat. She looked uncomfortable, but she said nothing. She cut her turkey into very small pieces and ate slowly, keeping her eyes on her plate. She was a woman who had learned the art of strategic silence, of knowing when her husband was being cruel and choosing not to see it, because seeing it would require her to do something about it. But what Raymond didn't know was that his behavior was being watched very carefully. Little Sophie, sitting across the table with her big glasses and her quiet eyes, was watching everything. She saw her father ignore Eugene. She saw her mother look uncomfortable but say nothing. And she saw Eugene, calm, steady, unbothered on the surface but hurt underneath. The way people are hurt when they have been made invisible so many times that they've learned to keep their pain folded up and tucked away like a letter they'll never send. After the main course, Sophie did something that surprised everyone. She looked across the table at Eugene and said, "Mr. Eugene, did you really cook all of this?" Eugene looked at her. "Yes, sweetheart, all of it. It's really good. The sweet potato pie is the best I've ever had." Eugene smiled. A real smile. "Thank you, Sophie. That means a lot." Raymond looked annoyed. "Sophie, finish your dinner." "I am finishing it, Daddy. I was just saying thank you." She turned back to her book. But she glanced at Eugene one more time and gave him a tiny, secret smile. The kind of smile that says, "I see you, even if nobody else does." But the real trouble was just beginning. After dinner, while Eugene was washing the dishes, he insisted, even though Constance told him to leave them. Raymond pulled Constance into the living room. Eugene could hear them through the kitchen wall. The old house had thin walls, and Raymond wasn't trying to be quiet. "Aunt Connie, I need to talk to you about your situation." "My situation?" "Your health, your finances, the house."
You need to start thinking about the future.
"I think about the future every day, Raymond. That's what old people do." "I mean practically. You need someone managing your accounts, someone in the family. I can take over your finances, make sure everything is in order. I've already spoken to a lawyer about power of attorney." "You've already spoken to a lawyer?" Constance's voice went cold. The kind of cold that comes right before a storm. "Without asking me?" "I was just being proactive, Aunt Connie. It's for your own protection." "My protection? Or your convenience?" There was a silence. Eugene stood at the kitchen sink with his hands in warm, soapy water, not moving, barely breathing. He could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. "Aunt Connie, I'm just trying to help," Raymond said, his voice smoother now, the salesman's voice, the voice of a man who knows how to make dangerous things sound reasonable.
If you wanted to help Raymond, you would have been here more than twice a year.
You would have fixed the back steps. You would have driven me to the doctor. You would have sat with me on that porch when I was so lonely I talked to Arthur's photograph. But you didn't do any of those things. Eugene did. So don't you walk into my house on a holiday and tell me you're trying to help. Raymond left 20 minutes later. He didn't say goodbye to Eugene. He didn't say goodbye to Constance either. He walked out the front door, got into his black Mercedes, and drove away with Janelle in the passenger seat and Sophie in the back seat, her face pressed against the window, looking back at the house with those big, quiet eyes. And that single moment set off a chain of events nobody could stop. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, Eugene arrived at Birch Hill on a Monday morning and found the front door unlocked. That was unusual. Constance always locked the door.
He called out and found her in the study, sitting at Arthur's old desk with papers spread in front of her and her reading glasses low on her nose. Her hands were trembling, but not from arthritis, from anger. "Mrs. Webb, what's wrong?" She looked up. Her blue eyes were blazing. "Raymond has been stealing from me." Eugene pulled a chair beside the desk. Constance showed him what she had found. Bank statements she hadn't looked at in months. Withdrawals she hadn't authorized. $5,000 here, $3,000 there, a $10,000 transfer in September. Small enough amounts that they didn't trigger alerts. Large enough that they added up. Over the past 18 months, nearly $60,000 had been moved from her savings account into an account she didn't recognize. "I called the bank this morning," Constance said. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. "That account belongs to Raymond. He set it up using the financial information I gave him 2 years ago when he helped me file my taxes. I trusted him. He's my brother's son." Eugene's wide hands gripped his knees. He felt something hot and sharp rise in his chest. Not for himself, but for this woman. This 83-year-old woman who had already lost a husband and a daughter and a lifetime of tomorrows that she'd never get back, and who had trusted the one family member she had left. That family member, the one with the charcoal suits and the silver watch and the smile that never reached his eyes, had been reaching into her accounts like a thief reaching into a purse, taking what he wanted while she sat on the porch drinking tea and wondering why he never called. The cruelty of it made Eugene's stomach turn. Not just the stealing, the lying, the smiling face at Thanksgiving while the money disappeared underneath, the kiss on the cheek while the knife went in. "What do you want to do?" Eugene asked quietly. Constance was silent for a long time. She looked at Arthur's photograph on the desk, a silver frame, Arthur in a gray suit, smiling, strong, alive. She touched the frame with her fingertips. "Arthur would have handled this in 10 minutes, she said. He would have picked up the phone, called Raymond, and said, 'Boy, if you take $1 more, I'll make sure you don't see a cent of what I leave behind.' And that would have been the end of it. But Arthur is gone, and I have to handle it myself." She straightened her back,
She adjusted her reading glasses, and she said, "I want to know everything, every dollar, every transfer, every lie. And then I want to fix it." But the real trouble was just beginning. Eugene spent the next 3 days at the dining table with Constance, going through bank statements line by line.
His reading glasses, cheap drugstore ones with scratched lenses, perched on his nose as he traced every withdrawal with a pencil, marking dates and amounts on a yellow legal pad. Constance sat beside him with her tea, her blue eyes sharp and focused despite the pain in her hands. They made a strange pair, the handyman and the widow, hunched over financial records like two detectives working a case in a kitchen that smelled like lemon polish and cold coffee. They called the bank together. They called a forensic accountant that Constance's lawyer recommended, a woman named Priya Sharma, who was sharp, thorough, and spoke in numbers the way poets speak in metaphors. Priya confirmed within 48 hours what Constance already suspected. Raymond Webb had been systematically withdrawing money from her accounts for over 18 months, using electronic transfers set up with login credentials he had obtained when Constance trusted him to help with her taxes 2 years earlier. The total was $62,400. Not $60,000, $62,400. Priya was exact. That extra $2,400 mattered because every dollar was a betrayal counted and cataloged. But that wasn't all Priya found. Priya discovered that Raymond had also contacted Constance's estate attorney, the lawyer who held her will, and had been asking detailed questions about the estate. How much was the house worth? What were the terms of the trust Arthur had set up? Were there any beneficiaries besides family? The estate attorney, an old man named Mr. Harding who had known Arthur for 40 years, had refused to share any details without Constance's authorization. But the fact that Raymond was asking, the fact that he was already circling the money while his aunt was still alive, told Constance everything she needed to know. "He's waiting for me to die," Constance said one afternoon, sitting in her chair on the porch, her tea growing cold in her cup. "My own nephew. He's waiting for me to die so he can take everything Arthur built." Eugene sat beside her in the wicker chair. The garden was brown now, the roses gone for winter, the hydrangeas bare sticks in the cold air. The sky was gray and low, like a ceiling that was pressing down. "He won't take anything," Eugene said. "We won't let him." And that was the moment Constance made a decision that would change everything. She called Mr. Harding the next day. She revised her will. She didn't tell Eugene what she had done. She didn't tell anyone. She simply sat in Mr. Harding's office for 2 hours, signed papers, shook his hand, and asked Eugene to drive her home. In the car, she looked out the window at the mountains, the Blue Ridge, fading in and out of the mist like something from a dream. And she said, "Eugene, I want you to come to Christmas dinner." "Ma'am, you know Raymond will be there." "That's exactly why I want you to come." Christmas dinner at Birch Hill was a formal affair. Constance insisted on it. The good china again, the candles, the crystal glasses. Eugene cooked, roast chicken this time, with rosemary potatoes and collard greens and a pecan pie that filled the whole house with the smell of brown sugar and butter. He wore his best flannel, the dark green one, and he even put on a tie, a solid brown one he had bought at Goodwill 3 years ago and never worn. Raymond arrived with Janelle and Sophie. He wore a charcoal suit and a silver watch. He walked in like he owned the place. He greeted Constance with a kiss on the cheek that was as warm as a handshake, and he looked at Eugene the way you look at a stain on the carpet that you've been meaning to have cleaned. They sat at the table, Raymond at one end, Constance at the other. Eugene in the middle, quiet as always, his wide hands folded on the white tablecloth. Sophie sat across from him again, her big glasses catching the candlelight. Her book, a battered copy of The Secret Garden, tucked under the table on her lap. Dinner was polite, surface-level conversation. The weather, cold for December, even by North Carolina standards. Raymond's work. He talked about a new development in South Charlotte, dropping numbers and square footage like confetti, trying to impress. Janelle's tennis lessons. She was playing doubles now, she said, though nobody asked. Nobody mentioned the bank accounts. Nobody mentioned the lawyer. Nobody mentioned the $62,400.
The tension sat underneath the table like a coiled spring, invisible but humming, and everyone could feel it even if nobody acknowledged it. Eugene ate quietly. He tasted nothing. He'd cooked this meal with care. The rosemary potatoes were crisp on the outside and soft in the middle. The collard greens were simmered with smoked turkey necks the way his mother used to make them. The pecan pie had a crust so flaky it practically dissolved on the tongue. But he couldn't taste any of it. His stomach was tight. He knew what was coming. He could see it in Constance's posture, in the way she held her fork a little too firmly, in the way her eyes kept drifting to Raymond with an expression that looked less like anger and more like grief. She was grieving the nephew she had hoped he was. She was grieving the family she deserved but never got. After dinner, after the plates were cleared and the candles had burned down to stubs, Constance set down her fork. She folded her napkin, slowly, precisely, the way she did everything, and placed it beside her plate. She looked at Raymond with those blue eyes, those ancient, furious, heartbroken blue eyes that had seen 83 years of life and every kind of betrayal it could offer, and she said, "Raymond, I know about the money." The room went still. Janelle's hand froze on her water glass. Raymond's smile faded like a light going out. "What money?" Raymond said. But his voice had changed. The smoothness was gone. Underneath it was something sharp and cornered, like an animal that knows the trap is closed. $60,000, Raymond, from my savings account, into yours, over 18 months. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was too old? Too confused? Raymond's eyes darted to Eugene. "He told you this, didn't he?" He pointed at Eugene. "This man, this handyman, has been in your ear for years, turning you against your own family." "Eugene didn't tell me anything," Constance said. Her voice was iron. "My bank statements told me. My accountant confirmed it, and my lawyer has documented everything. So don't you sit at my table and blame the one person in this world who has never taken a single thing from me." Raymond stood up. His chair scraped backward. His face was flushed, his jaw working. "Aunt Connie, you don't understand. I was going to pay it back. I had some debts, some business expenses. I was going to—" "You were going to steal from a dying old woman and hope she never noticed," Constance said. She wasn't shouting. She was calm. Terrifyingly calm. "And you would have succeeded if you hadn't gotten greedy." Raymond turned to Eugene. His voice was ugly now, all pretense stripped away. "You think you're something special? You're a handyman. You fix toilets, you mow lawns. You are nothing. And you're sitting at this table acting like you belong here, but you don't. You never will. You're the help." Eugene looked at Raymond. He didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. He just looked at him with those steady brown eyes and said, in a voice as calm as deep water, "I'd rather be the help who stayed than the family who stole." The room went completely silent. Raymond's mouth opened and closed. Janelle looked at the table. Sophie, quiet, watching, absorbing Sophie, stared at Eugene with something that looked a lot like admiration. Constance reached across the table and took Eugene's hand. Her thin, papery fingers wrapped around his wide, rough ones. She squeezed. Then she looked at Raymond. "You are no longer welcome in this house," she said, "and you are no longer in my will. I have left everything, the house, the accounts, the investments, everything Arthur and I built over 50 years, to the person who earned it. Not by blood, by being here, by showing up, by caring. I have left it to Eugene." Raymond's face went white, then red, then a shade of purple that looked medically concerning. He stepped back from the table like he had been shoved. "You can't do that," he said. His voice was strangled. "I'm your family. I'm your blood. You can't leave $4 million to the handyman." "I can," Constance said. "And I have. Mr. Harding has the documents. It's done." Raymond looked at Eugene with pure, burning hatred. Then he looked at Constance with something worse. The cold, selfish fury of a man who has just realized that the thing he was counting on has disappeared, and he has no one to blame but himself. He left. He didn't slam the door. He closed it quietly, which was somehow worse. The Mercedes started in the driveway. The headlights swept across the front of the house, and then he was gone. Janelle lingered for a moment. She looked at Constance with wet eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know about the money. I'm so sorry." And then she followed her husband. But Sophie didn't move. She was still sitting at the table, her glasses slightly crooked, her book in her lap, looking at Eugene. "Mr. Eugene?" she said.
Yes, sweetheart? Are you really going to live here?
Eugene looked at Constance. Constance looked at him. Neither of them had talked about this. The will was about the future, a future Constance wouldn't be part of. But Sophie's question hung in the air like the last note of a song, and it needed an answer. "This is Mrs. Webb's house," Eugene said. "As long as she's here, I'm here." Sophie nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she said very quietly, "Good, because she needs you, and I think you need her too." Constance pressed her hand to her chest, the thing she did when the emotion was too big for her body, and closed her eyes. And when she opened them, she looked at Sophie with a warmth so deep it could have melted stone. "Come here, child," Constance said. Sophie walked around the table. Constance pulled her close, carefully because her arms were frail, and held her for a long time.
And in that embrace was everything that matters. Two people at the beginning and the end of their lives, holding on to each other in a room that had just been emptied of pretense and filled with truth. Eugene sat at the table in the candlelight, his hands folded, his brown tie slightly crooked, looking at Constance and Sophie. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel quiet. He felt full. The months that followed were gentle ones. Constance's health declined slowly but steadily, the way a candle burns down, still bright, still warm, but getting shorter. Eugene was there every day. He brought groceries, he made tea with honey. He tended Arthur's garden even though it was winter and nothing was growing, because Constance liked to look out the window and see the beds neat and the soil turned. "It's resting," she told him. "Not dead, resting." In February, something unexpected happened. Sophie started visiting on her own. Janelle, despite everything that had happened, despite the lawyers and the courtroom and the ugly words, called Eugene one Saturday morning and said, in a voice that was careful and quiet, "Mr. Wells, Sophie keeps asking to visit the house. She wants to see you in the garden. Would that be okay?" Eugene said, "Of course, she's always welcome." And so Janelle would drop Sophie off on Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock. The girl would climb out of the car with her book under her arm, her glasses slightly crooked because she kept bumping them when she pushed her hair behind her ear, and she would walk up the porch steps into the house like she was coming home. Which, in a way, she was. Because home is not always the place where your parents live. Sometimes home is the place where someone sees you clearly and treats you like you matter. Sophie helped Eugene in the garden. She wasn't afraid of dirt. She knelt beside him in the flower beds, raking dead leaves, spreading mulch, pulling the few stubborn weeds that didn't know it was winter and kept pushing up through the cold ground like tiny green fists. She asked Eugene questions while they worked. "How deep do you plant tulip bulbs? Why do roses have thorns? Do worms feel it when you cut them in half?" And Eugene answered every question seriously, because he believed that every honest question deserves an honest answer, no matter who is asking. She sat on the porch in Constance's chair, in Constance's spot, and listened to stories that Eugene told about the old woman. Stories about Arthur and the horse farm in Virginia, and the daughter whose name Constance could finally say in her last months. Her name was Catherine, and saying it didn't hurt anymore, because now there was someone listening who cared enough to hold the name gently, like a small bird in cupped hands. One Saturday afternoon, Sophie was on the porch with Constance, while Eugene swept the front steps. The air smelled like wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney and the distant sweetness of pine trees. Sophie looked at Constance and said, "Aunt Connie, why does my dad think money is more important than people?" Constance looked at that 11-year-old girl with her two big glasses and her too big question and said,
Because somebody taught him to count the wrong things, baby. They taught him to count dollars instead of days. And by the time he figured out the difference, he had a lot of dollars and very few days with remembering. Sophie thought about this. Then she said, "I don't want to count the wrong things." "Then you won't," Constance said, "because you already know the difference. And that puts you ahead of most grown folks I've ever met." Eugene leaned on his broom and looked out at the garden, at the bare rose bushes waiting for spring, at the mountains in the distance fading into blue mist. And he thought about Darlene and the yellow house and the life that was smaller than he had hoped. And he realized something. His life wasn't small at all. It was just quiet. And quiet is not the same as small. Some of the biggest things in the world happen in silence. Seeds breaking open underground. Love growing between two people who never expected it. A child learning the difference between what matters and what doesn't. Constance Webb passed on a warm evening in April, sitting in her chair on the porch with a cup of tea in her hand and the last light of the day on the mountains. Eugene was beside her. The garden was blooming. Arthur's roses had come back, red and full and stubborn, just like Constance herself. The tea had gone cold. Her eyes were closed. Her hand was resting on the arm of the chair, her fingers relaxed, and she was smiling. A small smile. Peaceful. Like a woman who had finished a very long conversation and was satisfied with how it ended. Eugene sat beside her for a long time after. He didn't call anyone right away. He just sat there, in the wicker chair, his wide hands on his knees, listening to the birds and the breeze and the silence of a house that had just lost its heart. The following week, Mr. Harding read the will in his office on Main Street. It was a small room with leather chairs and bookshelves, and a window that looked out onto a dogwood tree. Raymond was there with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man from Charlotte in an Italian suit. Eugene was there in his flannel shirt and brown tie. Mr. Harding read the document in a flat, measured voice, the way lawyers do. And when he reached the part about Eugene, "I leave the entirety of my estate, including the property at 12 Birch Hill Road, all financial accounts, investments, and personal effects, to Eugene Henry Wells, who has been my caretaker, my companion, and my family in every way that matters." Raymond stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He contested the will. Of course he did. He hired more lawyers. He filed motions. He claimed undue influence, that Eugene had manipulated an elderly woman. He claimed diminished capacity, that Constance didn't know what she was doing. He called Eugene names that I won't repeat in a courtroom full of strangers. He even tried to claim that Eugene had isolated Constance from her family, which was so absurd that even his own lawyer looked uncomfortable, because the records showed that Raymond had visited Constance a total of 19 times in 12 years. 19 times. Eugene had been there nearly every day, over 4,000 days. But the will was solid. Constance had been of sound mind. Her doctor confirmed it. Her dentist confirmed it. Even the woman at the grocery store who chatted with her every Thursday confirmed it. The documents were witnessed and notarized, and as airtight as Mr. Harding's 40 years of experience could make them. Mr. Harding, who had known Arthur and Constance since before Raymond was born, took the stand and testified that Mrs. Webb's wishes were clear, specific, deliberate, and made with full awareness of what she was doing and why she was doing it. "She told me," Mr. Harding said in his quiet, steady voice, "that she wanted her estate to go to the person who earned it, not by blood, by showing up." The court upheld the will. Every penny, every acre, every rose in the garden. Raymond walked out of the courthouse without looking at anyone, got into his black Mercedes, which, as it turned out, was leased, and drove away. Eugene heard later that Raymond and Janelle separated the following spring. He didn't feel satisfaction about that. He felt sad, because a family had fallen apart, and no amount of money or justice could put it back together. Eugene didn't move into the big house, not right away. He stayed in his apartment above the hardware store for another month, going to Birch Hill every day to tend the garden and air out the rooms and make sure everything was kept the way Constance would have wanted. He polished the dining table. He washed the good china. He wound the clock in the hallway. He kept the porch swept. When he finally moved in, he brought very little. His clothes, his tools, the framed photograph of his mother, the wooden cross he had carved. He put them in the guest room, not the master bedroom. The master bedroom still felt like Arthur and Constance's. He wasn't ready to take it. Maybe he never would be. And that was fine. The first night in the house, Eugene made himself a cup of tea with honey and sat on the porch in the wicker chair. The roses were still blooming. The mountains were turning purple in the dusk. The air smelled like warm earth and pine and something sweet, honeysuckle maybe, climbing the fence at the edge of the property. His phone buzzed. A text message from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it. "Hi, Mr. Eugene. It's Sophie. Mom gave me your number. I just wanted to say I'm glad you're there. Aunt Connie would be happy. Also, can I come visit on Saturday? I want to help in the garden. And I have a new book I think you'd like." Eugene read the message twice. Then he set the phone down on the porch railing, picked up his tea, and looked out at the garden. And for the first time since Constance had gone, he smiled.
Some people walk into your life like a thunderstorm, loud, dramatic, demanding attention. And some people pull out a chair at your table so quietly that you don't even notice they've sat down until you realize they're the only one who stayed. Eugene Wells was the quiet one, and he was the one who mattered. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with a friend. Drop a comment and tell us what part hit you the hardest. We'll see you in the next one.